He tells them, don't tell anybody what I've done, right? Keep this a really big secret. And Jesus says that, a lot of times after he's done something really great and miraculous. And then what do people do? Oh yeah, they tell everybody, right? He says, don't tell everybody, so they run and tell everybody as fast as they can. I just think it's funny. I just think that's funny. I actually think it might be code, right? Maybe that's like biblical code. When I say, don't tell anyone, that means go spread the news as fast as you possibly can, right? Someday I'll look into that further, but I just find it ironic. I just find that really funny. We're continuing our sermon series called Be Brave, and today is all about there's more than meets the eye. A little mystical, a little bit of magical. I had to resist the urge to do a magic trick for you this morning. Trust me, you don't want that to happen. I'm not very good. But there is this idea that there's more going on than what we just see, and it brought up kind of a modern phenomenon that I'm sure we can all relate to in one way or another. I hope you know what I mean when I say the word selfie. You know what a selfie is? Yes? Okay, can someone be brave and just define for us what a selfie is? There. Oh, Ethan's acting it out for us. Thank you very much, Ethan. Right, so you take a picture of yourself, right? It's all about image, and there may be like an overload of these in our society today. Have you taken a selfie? Can you admit I've taken a selfie? Never. She's like, well, not in the last 5 minutes, but So Pastor Asa actually told me about an NPR story where they did a little bit more research on the concept of selfies and what might be going on there. The title of the story is actually called Selfies, There's More Than Meets the Eye. All right, then. So this woman was researching what is behind the selfie. Like, why are we compelled to take these pictures of ourselves? Is a mirror not good enough? I don't know. She actually found a couple of really interesting examples of how the selfie is working more than just a vanity, right? She found a woman who suffers from a really rare disease called Cotard's delusion. I always have to look again because it's so foreign. I've never heard of it before. This is a disease where the person actually thinks that they are dead. I know. They're living life. They're alive. They wake up every morning, and yet their mind tells them that they're dead. Doesn't that sound so strange? Right. And she actually, this particular woman, when she described it, she believed her husband was dead too. So like those people around her, I know, it's really weird. She went through all kinds of treatment, okay? So they gave her drugs and therapy and all this stuff, and nothing worked. Nothing worked. So naturally, she grew pretty depressed, spent a lot of time by herself, and purely by chance, she started taking her picture with her phone, started playing with the camera on her phone, and started taking selfies. And you know what? It was the cure. It was the cure, taking selfies. Because the picture, showed her something that she couldn't see in her own mind. Does that make sense? Not even a little bit. I got another example for you. Here we go. There's like a conversation going on here, a family conversation going on across the room. Here's another example, though, about the selfie, is that same researcher, she also found a woman who was using the selfie to change her own body image, to change her own image of herself, right? And so she got in the habit of taking selfies because it showed her something that her mind would not allow her to see. When she looked in the mirror, she saw all the hateful things that she would say to herself inside of her head. But when she took a picture, she could see something different. So the researcher kind of concluded that selfies are a way to show people how you want to be seen. Or I would go one step further. I would say that selfies are a way to see ourselves outside of our own inner mind and see ourselves outside of our own opinion. Maybe even to see ourselves as God might see us. So we'll come back to selfies. But there are two brave people in the scripture that we want to talk about today. The first one is the woman. The woman in the scripture who has had this affliction for 12 years. For 12 years, can you imagine that? To be sick with the same thing for 12 years? No, that's not even something that I can really relate to, that I can imagine. She has seen doctors and tried so many cures, and not a single thing has worked. She's spent all of her resources. It says in the scripture that she has spent all of her finances on this. So we can probably deduce that she's pretty broke. She has no more money. She's financially just done. At the same time, if she's hemorrhaging, that means that she's unclean. And so she's had to be separate from society for all that time. 12 years of not being normal in society, not being able to just live in your house like a normal person or relate to your family or just go out and shop for the things that you need. No, she's been brought totally low. And then one other thing I thought of this morning throughout the different services today, so I'll get a little bit more graphic here. If she's been hemorrhaging for 12 years, wouldn't that be, she would feel physically weak, right? I mean, it's not so much that, if you had a gushing wound, you would bleed out. You would need like blood transfusions, right? But this is just enough that it would weaken her physical abilities. So she is brought way low. She's just bottom of the barrel. Nothing else to call on. Nothing else that she could possibly do. Now, the other brave character in the story is Jairus, the man. And actually, the woman and Jairus, they're like held up against each other because I think they're so different. Where the woman was brought really low, and she had no social status, no economic status, none of that. Jairus is her opposite. He's an officer in the temple. He's high and mighty. Y'all, I mean, it's actually really shocking that he goes to Jesus himself because a man like that would not go himself, right? He would send a servant. He would send someone else to say, oh, my master, would like to see you. And then Jesus would have to respond via the servant. But in this case, Jairus is so devastated that his daughter is dying that he goes himself and he actually grovels to Jesus. He kneels down in front of him and says, please, I need your help. Come and heal my daughter. He's devastated. He leaves behind his politics, his pride. The woman leaves behind any hope that she might have of overcoming this situation, and she just jumps all in, which tells me something about this devastating situation they find themselves in, is that when we are truly in need of healing, our faith takes priority over everything else. And Jesus always answers somebody who's been healed with this same answer. He says, your faith has made you well. So here's the question I pose to you to kind of roll around in your mind. So is it Jesus who is doing the healing and just that one-sided healing? Or is it our faith? Verse 34 is where we see this. He's talking to the woman and he says, your faith has made you well after she has touched him. And to get to that point where Jesus can say that to her, I have to imagine that being brave was incredibly difficult for these two characters because they had to put their trust in unseen things that were yet untested. And I am willing to bet, with better odds than that lottery this last week, I am willing to bet that we've all wished that our faith could make us well, or that our faith could make someone that we love well. Have you ever been in a situation in your life or lived alongside someone that you just wish, if I could believe enough, if I could be faithful enough, it could make me well? Yeah? This is kind of a dangerous idea. So I have this friend who a few years ago, she was struggling mightily with a huge traumatic thing that kept happening in her life. And she's one of these people that I look at her and I think, man, if someone is faithful, she is, right? And she was struggling at that point in her life with getting pregnant and staying pregnant. And I don't want to rehash, that situation because it was really traumatic for her as it has been for anyone who's faced that. But every time she would get pregnant, we'd celebrate, but small, because you don't know what's going to happen. And then when she miscarried, we would grieve and mourn together. And one day after, it'd been a couple of weeks since she had miscarried, and I called her and she didn't answer the phone. And I just thought, well, she's just done. She can't talk or whatever, which I was right. And then she messaged me. So she typed out her words and she said, I don't understand. I am faithful. I go to church and I read the Bible and I believe with all my heart and I pray. Oh, do I pray? But why does this keep happening? Why hasn't my faith made me well? It was devastating. This becomes more of a question of what our faith means in relation to our proximity with the healing capacity, the healing nature of God. I mean, does being brave mean that we go through the required and pious motions of what it looks like to be faithful, and then we expect our just reward for our trouble? Or is the healing of faith so much more unpredictable than that? So another NPR story that actually Pastor Asa passed me this week, he's an NPR fanatic. I don't know if you know that about Pastor Asa, was about entanglement. And it was fascinating. It's actually a study that is sponsored by the U.S. government. And they're sponsoring the study because they want the science of it to apply to like consistency of information across the board. You'll understand in just a second when I explain it to you. But basically, the idea of entanglement is that they take two atoms. If you can picture two atoms sitting on a table, right, like you can see an atom. Two atoms sitting on a table, and they've got all these lasers and fancy whatchamacallits, I don't know. And they use the lasers, and they shoot them at the atoms, and they pinpoint the protons, and then they manipulate the protons and the atoms in a way that I cannot possibly describe to you, and they make the two atoms become one. Like they're the same. They have the same makeup and they do the same thing, but they're still sitting like apart from each other on the table. You with me up to this point? The crazy thing about this is that if they do one thing to one of those atoms, it happens to the other one simultaneously. That's crazy. That's like sci-fi, but it's real. It's real. And they've done studies where they take the atoms and they separate them by like 80-something miles, and it still works. 80-something miles apart, you do something to this atom, and the exact same thing happens to the other atom. They actually say that this probably happens in nature, like without all the lasers and all that stuff, more often than we could probably predict. Like, as in, there's an atom in someone sitting over here that is exactly the same as someone over here. And so we actually are connected in this way, and when one thing happens to one of us, it happens to the other of us. I know, it's quite skeptical. I know. But I began to wonder, like, what if faith is like that? What if faith is like that? Where we become so entangled with God, with Christ, with grace and love, that when one thing happens, it happens to the other. What if faith is like that? There's this couple that I knew at my last church, and they're like the picture-perfect couple. Oh my goodness. They're about 27 years old, and when I was there, I got to baptize their oldest child, little boy. And since then, they've had another child, little girl, right? So they just got the whole thing going on. They look really good on Facebook, too. They take good pictures. I'll just say that. And they got the boy, they got the girl. Okay, perfect. It never crossed my mind that part of this picture-perfect family would be that she would be diagnosed with cancer. I mean, it just blew everyone's mind. So soon after their second child was born, they found out that she had cancer. And so her doctors got right on it, and they started chemo treatments and radiation and all that. And they jumped in gung-ho wholeheartedly. And every single time she went for a round of chemo, they'd do the selfie, and the two of them are sitting side by side, and they'd hold up the number of fingers that show what round of chemo they're on. Big, huge smiles, posting about how faithful they are being and praying so hard, right? And she went through all her rounds of chemo, and the time came when, they'd take tests and they'd find out how the chemo had done and what progress she'd made. So I waited on Facebook, and when I saw the post of what had happened when they got the results, y'all, nothing had changed. Like her cell counts were still all out of whack, and the tumors had not shrunk at all. It was devastating. And And then the strangest thing happened that week. I hadn't seen them since I left that church, and I ran into him at the gas station. He saw me first, and so he called my name across the store, and I turned around, and when I realized it was him, I started to do what like any of you would do when you see a friend who's been in this really difficult situation. I started to like get ready, like get ready to listen as he talks about how it's just awful and how he questions like, where is God? How can this possibly happen, right? And then I sort of gather up all the faith I possibly can inside of me, and I think, well, if you're missing yours right now and you can't carry it, here's mine. You can have it, And I walked over to him, and he looks at me with this big, huge grin on his face. And he gave me a huge hug, and as we backed away from the hug, I was wondering, this has got to be an act, right? He's just putting on a front. He's being strong. But we pulled away from the hug, and I looked into his face again, and no, this was not fake. There was real joy in his face. So I asked him, I said, hey, how are you? How's your wife? How are the kids? And he filled me in on everything and how the treatment was going and all that stuff. And he said, you know what? This has been a wonderful experience. And I just looked at him kind of dumbfounded. Do you know what he said? He said, we've been more blessed by the difficulty of this year than by any other, filled with, perfect this and that, good and great blessings. Our reliance has shifted from ourselves to Christ. She's still on chemo. She's still on chemo. I just saw their Facebook selfie the other day. And now it takes not just all her fingers, but quite a few of his to count how many rounds they've done. And you know what? They're still filled with joy. They're still filled with joy. And healing has not come as they expected. And it has not come how we might demand for this young wife and mother. But just the same, I know she believes that her faith has made her well. So be brave. There's more than meets the eye. We continue our time of worship through the giving of tithes and offerings.